How come he don't want me, man?
Will Smith didn't grow up in a Hollywood mansion or on the set of a sitcom. He was born in West Philadelphia on September 25th, 1968, long before the world knew his name. His early life looked normal on the outside, but inside his home, something darker was brewing. His father, Willard Smith Sr, was a US Air Force veteran and refrigeration engineer. His mother, Caroline Bright, was a school board worker who valued education and calm. But behind closed doors, their marriage was full of tension. What most people don't know is this: the tragedy didn't start in Hollywood. It started at home. Will was just 9 years old when he witnessed something that would haunt him for life. In his own words, he saw his father hit his mother so hard that she collapsed. He froze. He didn't scream. He didn't step in. He didn't do anything. And for decades, he carried the guilt of that moment, calling himself a coward in his memoir. This moment didn't just leave a bruise on his memory, it shaped his entire identity. He learned to be funny to keep the peace. If he could make people laugh, maybe the shouting would stop. Maybe the punches wouldn't come. That's how the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was born, not on stage, but as a survival skill. The confident smile, the charm, the high-energy jokes. Those were all shields. Will used humour like armour. He wasn't poor. In fact, his family was considered middle class. But money doesn't mean safety. And Will's home never felt safe. By the time he was a teenager, his parents separated. The divorce wasn't finalised until years later, in 2000, when Will was already famous. But the emotional split had already taken root. His mother raised him, and he stayed close to her for life, but the damage had already been done. Here's where it becomes even more painful. That early trauma followed him into every success. Every movie role, every red carpet, every laugh from a crowd. Behind it all was the boy who couldn't stop his father from hurting his mother. That guilt became fuel. He said everything he built came from trying to protect his mum. Fame wasn't just about money or power. It was about trying to erase a memory that wouldn't go away. As he grew older, he leaned into rap music as an outlet. By the time he was in high school, he was already performing and experimenting with lyrics. But even in his earliest days, performance was tied to survival. That's the part of Will Smith's story that most people miss. It didn't start with talent. It started with trauma. And yet, despite all that pain, he was about to explode onto the music scene and crash just as fast. By the mid-1980s, Will Smith had a new identity: the Fresh Prince. Alongside his friend Jeffrey Towns, better known as DJ Jazzy Jeff, the two formed a rap duo that changed the sound of mainstream music. Unlike the rough, hard-edged rap that was dominating city streets, their style was fun, light-hearted, and safe enough to play in suburban homes. Songs like Parents Just Don't Understand and Summertime made Will a household name by age 20. But behind the scenes, success was already coming at a dangerous cost. The Fresh Prince was making money fast: fancy cars, luxury clothes, and a party lifestyle most kids could only dream of. But Will didn't understand how to manage it. He didn't pay his taxes. By 21, the IRS came knocking, and they didn't just ask nicely, they seized most of his belongings. The star who had just won a Grammy was now broke. He had earned millions and lost nearly all of it. This wasn't just a financial disaster, it was the start of a long pattern, big highs, followed by even bigger crashes. He later said, "I had a hit record, a Grammy, and I was broke." It was the kind of wake-up call that doesn't just sting, it breaks you. Hollywood had its eyes on him, but the music industry had turned cold. Hardcore rappers called him soft. Critics said he wasn't real. And when rap legends like Public Enemy and LL Cool J boycotted the Grammys because the rap award wasn't televised, Will stood alone, smiling in the spotlight, but deeply aware of the silence from his peers. Here's the twist: rock bottom didn't end his career, it saved it. In 1990, with his finances in ruins and his music reputation shaky, Will got an unexpected invitation. Music legend Quincy Jones invited him to a party in Los Angeles. What Will didn't know was that Quincy had a hidden plan. He was casting a new sitcom and wanted to see if Will could act. No script, no rehearsal, just a living room full of strangers and one shot at redemption. Will said no. He wasn't ready, but Quincy pushed him, hard. You either do it now or you lose the opportunity. Will finally gave in. He performed on the spot, raw, nervous, unprepared. But something clicked. The room lit up. Quincy saw it. And just like that, Will Smith became the star of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. In one night, he went from broke to booked, from bankrupt to legendary. The show debuted in 1990 and became a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just a comedy, it was a second chance. For the first time, Will felt seen, not just as a rapper, but as an actor, a star, a leading man. But even then, the fear of failure never left him. He worked harder than anyone on set, constantly rehearsing, constantly refining, because in his mind, the IRS could come back, the fame could vanish again. He didn't just want to succeed, he needed to. Once The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air took off, Will Smith was no longer just a rapper-turned-actor. He was a rising star in every corner of entertainment. The show ran for 6 seasons, from 1990 to 1996, and during that time, Will used every break between filming to plan his next move. He didn't just want to be popular, he wanted to be the biggest movie star in the world. But here's the part most people overlook. His climb to the top came with a heavy cost. Will was working non-stop. If he wasn't filming the sitcom, he was in meetings, reading scripts, or recording music. He started studying the careers of Tom Cruise, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and other A-list stars. He researched what made movies global hits. He looked at release dates, trailer styles, even poster colours. Every decision he made was strategic, and it paid off. In 1995, Bad Boys exploded at the box office. In 1996, Independence Day became one of the highest grossing films of all time. Then in 1997, Men in Black sealed the deal. Will Smith wasn't just a movie star, he was the face of blockbuster entertainment. But while the world saw a hero, Will felt like he was living inside a mask. Underneath the million-dollar smile, the weight of being perfect was starting to show. He later admitted that every role, every red carpet moment felt like an act. The world expected him to be funny, charming, flawless. But inside, he often felt unseen. No matter what I did, he said, people only saw the image. This is when the crack started to form, not in his career, but in his sense of self. As the box office wins stacked up, Will started chasing something deeper. He didn't just want to be likable, he wanted to be respected. In 2001, he took on his most demanding role yet, Ali. Portraying the legendary boxer Muhammad Ali meant changing everything, his body, his speech, his mindset. He trained for over a year, boxing for hours every day, gaining 35 pounds of muscle and studying the fighter's every move. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination, but Will confessed that the transformation nearly broke him. He was exhausted, physically and mentally. The pressure to honour Ali's legacy, to be taken seriously as an actor, weighed more than any punch in the ring. It wasn't just about acting, it was about finally being enough. And just when he thought he was healing through success, an even more personal role reopened his oldest wounds. In 2006, Will starred in The Pursuit of Happiness, playing a father fighting to survive with his young son. The story mirrored parts of his real life. The pain, the poverty, the fear of failing his children. He didn't have to imagine it, he had lived it. Filming emotional scenes with his real-life son Jaden stirred something deep inside him. He wasn't just pretending to be a desperate father, he was revisiting the boy who once froze while his own mother collapsed. The tears in that film weren't acting, they were real. For Will, the movie wasn't just a career high, it was therapy. After The Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith had finally proven what he always wanted to, that he was more than a funny guy, more than just a blockbuster star. He was an actor with depth, but even as the awards and praise came in, new regrets were quietly forming behind the scenes. And here's where things start to feel more complicated, because even success can carry its own kind of heartbreak. Will started turning down roles, some because they didn't feel right, others because he was scared they might ruin the careful image he had built. One of those roles was Neo in The Matrix. He passed on it and later called it the wildest mistake of his career. The movie went on to become a pop culture phenomenon. Then came Django Unchained, a Quentin Tarantino film that tackled slavery and revenge in a brutally raw way. Will hesitated. He was concerned about the violent tone and the direction of the story, so he stepped away. Jamie Foxx took the role, and won major praise for it. These weren't just missed opportunities. They were painful reminders of how fear and perfectionism could cost him more than just a role. They could cost him history. Will later admitted, "I've made bad choices, and sometimes I wonder what might have been." For someone who had worked so hard to overcome his past, watching others take the spotlight in moments that could have been his created a new kind of ache, one built on silence and second guesses. But fate wasn't finished with him yet. In 2021, he got the chance to play Richard Williams, the controversial and determined father of tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. The film King Richard wasn't about a perfect man. It was about a complicated father trying to give his daughters a better life. In other words, it was a role made for Will Smith. This was more than just acting. It was personal. It was full circle. Will poured himself into the role. Every scene carried echoes of his own life, his mistakes, his love for his children, his drive to protect them at any cost. And this time, the world noticed. In 2022, after decades in the spotlight, Will finally won the Oscar for Best Actor. It should have been the greatest moment of his career. After all the pain, the pressure, the guilt, the sacrifices, he had made it. The standing ovation that night felt like a lifetime of pain being lifted. But no one could have predicted what happened just minutes later, when the moment of glory turned into a permanent scar. March 27th, 2022. The Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles was buzzing with energy. Will Smith had just reached the highest point of his acting career. After more than 30 years in the spotlight, he was finally awarded the Oscar for Best Actor. The applause roared like thunder, his speech was emotional, and for a brief moment it felt like everything had finally come together. But in less than 1 minute, that dream shattered, and the fallout would follow him forever. When comedian Chris Rock took the stage to present the next award, he made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head. She had previously spoken openly about her struggle with alopecia, a medical condition that causes hair loss. Will laughed at first, but when he saw Jada's expression shift, something inside him changed. Seconds later, Will walked onto the stage and slapped Chris across the face in front of millions watching live. The room went silent. The moment didn't just stop the show, it shocked the world. What followed was not applause, but isolation. After returning to his seat, Will shouted twice for Chris to "Keep my wife's name out your fucksing mouth." The Academy didn't remove him. In fact, he stayed and accepted his Oscar minutes later. But the damage had already been done. Within days, the backlash came hard and fast. The Academy launched a formal review. Actors and filmmakers expressed confusion, disappointment, and in some cases, anger. People debated it across news channels, podcasts, and articles, but inside, Will wasn't defending anything. He was unraveling. This wasn't just about a slap, it was about a lifetime of pressure finally exploding in public. Will later explained that the incident was the result of years of bottled up emotions, unresolved pain, and the weight of trying to be everything to everyone. That moment, he said, was not just about the joke. It was about everything that came before it. The trauma, the guilt, the pressure, and the fear of failing his family. The consequences were severe. Will resigned from the Academy. He was banned from attending the Oscars or any Academy events for 10 years. Several movie projects were paused or cancelled. Major studios distanced themselves. The victory he had waited for his whole life now felt like a punishment. And in the months that followed, Will wasn't on movie sets or red carpets. He was alone with his thoughts. He made several public apologies, some written, some filmed. But they weren't slick PR statements. They were raw, often tearful, filled with regret. "I was wrong," he said. "I hurt people." He didn't try to justify it. He didn't blame anyone. He just stood there, admitting he had lost control. For the first time in his career, Will Smith wasn't playing a role. He was simply a man who had made a mistake and couldn't take it back. In the days after the Oscars, Will Smith wasn't surrounded by friends or fans. He was surrounded by silence. Not the quiet kind, but the heavy, choking kind that comes after everything falls apart. The same man who once filled movie theatres with laughter was now trapped in the echo of a single moment. What made it worse wasn't just the public shame, it was how personal the collapse really was. Will later said he didn't sleep for nights. His mind replayed the moment over and over like a broken record. The slap, the look on Chris Rock's face, the stunned silence of the audience, the sound of his own voice yelling. He wasn't watching a clip on TV, he was trapped inside it. And the pain didn't stop when the cameras turned off. Will wasn't just dealing with his mistake, he was dealing with who he had become in that moment. For someone who had spent a lifetime trying to be the opposite of his violent father, the irony cut deep. That's what made the scar so unbearable. It wasn't just about what he did, it was about who he thought he'd never become. He had built his entire life around discipline, control, peace. He had promised himself he would never be that man. But in one flash of anger, he crossed a line he swore he'd never even approach. And it wasn't just his career that took the hit, it was his sense of identity. In a later interview, he admitted the guilt felt endless. "I let my people down," he said. "I let myself down." Even those closest to him weren't sure what to say. Jada kept a low profile. Friends kept their distance. It was as if no one knew how to approach the man who had always seemed untouchable, until now. But here's the truth most people forget. Will didn't run from the fallout. He faced it. He didn't disappear. He didn't blame others. Instead, he chose to speak, openly, painfully, and often. In videos, in interviews, in writing, he broke down the layers of why it happened. He didn't excuse it, he explained it. And the more he talked, the more the public saw a man who wasn't trying to fix his image, but one who was trying to understand himself. Still, the cost was massive. Some of his biggest film deals were shelved. Projects he had spent years developing were frozen in place. Brands stayed quiet. And the Academy ban wasn't just a headline. It was a daily reminder that one night had changed everything. But even with everything stripped away, Will kept trying to rebuild. Not his fame, but his peace. He focused on therapy, on rebuilding trust with his family, on staying present for his children. And he said something that stuck. "This wasn't just about the Oscars. This was about me finally facing things I should have dealt with decades ago." Long before the Oscars, before the fame or the fallout, Will Smith faced a different kind of heartbreak, one that didn't happen on a stage or under a spotlight. In 1992, while The Fresh Prince was still soaring, he married Sherry Zampino. She wasn't a co-star or someone from the industry trying to chase the spotlight. She was real, down to earth, and for a brief moment their life felt like something solid. But here's where the cracks started early. Not because of hate, but because of distance. That same year, Will became a father. His son, Trey, was born just as his career was taking off. And in that hospital room, holding his newborn, Will felt something he'd never experienced before. Not fame, not success, but purpose. For a little while, he tried to hold it all together. His career, his marriage, his new life as a father. But Hollywood doesn't wait. The sets got longer, the flights got farther. The gap between home and work started widening, and eventually it swallowed the marriage whole. By 1995, just 3 years after they married, Will and Sherry divorced. He would later call it one of the biggest failures of his life. Not because the love wasn't real, but because the dream of protecting his own child from a broken home had collapsed right in front of him. And the pain didn't stop at the divorce papers. It followed him through his relationship with his son. Trey was just a toddler, too young to understand why home suddenly had 2 addresses. Will tried to stay present, but there were gaps he couldn't fill. Missed moments, cancelled visits, phone calls that felt rushed. And as Trey got older, those little moments turned into bigger walls. Will once said that the silence between them was louder than any audience applause. He could make millions of people laugh on screen, but couldn't get his own son to open up. There were times he felt like a stranger in his own child's life, but what makes this part of the story powerful is that Will didn't give up. Years later, after all the fame, after all the success, he made a choice to fix what was broken. It wasn't through grand gestures or money, it was through time, through showing up, listening, being there even when it was uncomfortable. Trey didn't rush back. It took time, but slowly the walls came down. A hug here, a conversation there. Will said that some of the most meaningful moments in his life weren't on camera. They were sitting quietly with his son, just being present. That's what made this victory so rare. It wasn't won on a movie set. It was earned at home. Today, their bond is stronger than ever. Trey calls him not just dad, but a friend. And for Will, that's worth more than any trophy. Because healing that wound, the one he feared most, wasn't about being perfect. It was about never giving up. In 1997, just 2 years after his divorce, Will Smith married Jada Pinkett. She was bold, talented, and fiercely independent. To the outside world, they looked like Hollywood royalty, a power couple who had it all. But behind the fame, their relationship was anything but simple. And that's where most people get it wrong, because love doesn't protect you from pain. It often makes it louder. Will has always described Jada as his life partner, not just a wife, but someone who challenges him, pushes him, and refuses to let him stay comfortable. Their love wasn't soft or silent. It was loud, complicated, and sometimes messy. Together they had 2 children, Jaden in 1998 and Willow in 2000. Will poured everything into fatherhood, determined not to repeat the mistakes of his past. He read bedtime stories, showed up at school events, and even acted alongside Jaden in the pursuit of happiness. From the outside, it looked perfect. But the truth was more difficult. Even in their strongest years, Will and Jada were fighting private battles. There were rumours for years about their marriage, talk of separation, whispers of infidelity, and then in 2020, during a public interview, Jada confirmed she had been in what she called an entanglement with singer August Alsina during a time she and Will had separated. The internet exploded. But what really stood out was Will's face. Sitting beside her during the interview, he didn't shout, he didn't argue, he just listened, quiet, exhausted, holding back what looked like years of pain. That moment wasn't just viral, it was revealing. People joked about his expression, turned it into memes. But behind the screen, what you saw was a man carrying more emotional weight than anyone realised. Will later admitted that he and Jada had actually been living separate lives since 2016, even though they were still legally married. This is the part that cuts deep, because Will had always wanted a forever kind of love. But forever doesn't always look like a fairy tale. Their marriage became something more spiritual than romantic. He still called her his life partner. But even that term felt fragile under the weight of what they had both endured. Years of scrutiny, pain, misunderstandings, and unhealed wounds, and yet, through it all, they stayed connected. Not for appearances, not for headlines, but because, as Will put it, she's the love of my life, and the most complicated relationship I've ever had. It's not the kind of love people cheer for, but it's real. And in its own way, it's survived. Their story isn't about perfection, it's about persistence, and that's something Will has carried with him into every part of his life, from his roles to his children, to the moment he stood up at the Oscars, right or wrong, trying to defend the woman he never stopped loving. By 2016, just as Will Smith was wrestling with the tension in his marriage and the chaos of fame, another emotional storm hit, one that brought back everything from his childhood. His father, Willard Smith Sr, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctor said he only had months to live. And just like that, Will had to face the man who was both his greatest fear and deepest influence. This wasn't just about a dying parent. This was about a son returning to the very person who had shaped, and scarred, his entire life. Will had spent years talking about the trauma his father caused, the abuse, the silence, the guilt. Now, there was no more time to avoid it. He sat with his father during those final months. No cameras, no press, just quiet conversations between a man and the ghost of his past. And slowly, the dynamic shifted. Will was no longer the little boy frozen in fear. He was a grown man who had lived a full life and still carried that scared child inside him. Here's where the healing began, not in grand apologies, but in honesty. Will didn't erase the past. He didn't pretend his father had been perfect. Instead, he chose to remember both sides, the discipline and the damage. His dad had taught him work ethic, precision, and how to never quit, but he had also left bruises that shaped how Will loved, how he raised his own kids, and how he reacted to pain. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It wasn't clean, but it was real. Will later said that letting go of his anger was one of the hardest and most important things he ever did. When his father passed, the grief wasn't simple. It was layered, full of memory, conflict, and, finally, peace. And that experience opened Will's eyes to something else, his own health. Just a few years later, in 2019, during a routine colonoscopy, doctors found a pre-cancerous polyp. They removed it quickly, but the emotional impact lasted much longer. Will couldn't help but think, was he next? Would his kids one day stand at his bedside the same way he did with his dad? That fear pushed him to make major changes. He started focusing on his physical and mental health more than ever, not for the cameras, not for a role, but because life was suddenly fragile. That's what most people never saw. That behind the abs, the charm, the action hero image, Will Smith was battling something much more real: mortality. In 2021, he launched a YouTube series called Best Shape of My Life, where he planned to lose weight and reclaim his health. But the series turned into something else entirely. It became a deep dive into his mental state. In one episode, he admitted to having dark thoughts, moments where even he, one of the world's biggest stars, felt like giving up. And here's the part that matters most. He didn't hide it. He shared it. That honesty shocked fans, but it also inspired them, because for the first time, Will wasn't playing a role. He was just a man trying to survive his own mind. A man learning that real strength isn't about looking good. It's about telling the truth, even when it hurts. Today, Will Smith is 56 years old, and the bright lights don't shine on him the way they used to. But maybe that's the point. He no longer lives for the spotlight. He lives for something quieter, something deeper. He now resides in a 150-acre compound in Calabasas, California, a private estate with its own lake, gym, basketball court, and even a recording studio. It's not just a mansion, it's a sanctuary, a place where he can breathe, where he can reflect, where he can finally rest. But here's the truth. No matter how big the house, peace has to be built from the inside out. Even with a fortune estimated at over $350 million, Will knows better than most that money doesn't erase regret, it doesn't erase scandal, and it definitely doesn't heal the past. That's why these days, success for him isn't measured in box office numbers, it's measured in routine, in family dinners, in staying healthy, in showing up when it matters. And slowly, he's returned to the screen. In 2022, he starred in Emancipation, a powerful film about slavery and survival. It didn't get the attention it deserved, not because of the quality, but because the Oscar scandal still cast a long shadow. Still, Will didn't retreat. 2 years later, he made a quieter comeback, with something that felt more like him. In 2024, Bad Boys 4 hit theaters and made over $400 million worldwide. It wasn't a statement, it was a reminder that the charisma, the fun, the energy, none of that had ever left. It had just been buried under a moment of pain. Then came something unexpected. In 2025, for the first time in 2 decades, Will released a new music album called Based on a True Story. And on that album, one song stood out: Beautiful Scars. It wasn't a hit made for radio. It wasn't trying to chart. It was a confession, a soft, honest look at the pain he's carried, the mistakes, the lessons, the things he can't undo. And yet, the song didn't feel sad. It felt free, because that's the truth Will Smith has earned. You don't have to hide your scars. You just have to live with them. Through his company, Westbrook Incorporated, he's now helping his kids find their own voices. Jaden continues to grow in fashion and film. Willow creates music that's raw, powerful, and completely her own. Trey, the son he once feared losing, is now a quiet source of strength in his life. And though he and Jada still live separately, they continue to show up for each other. In 2025, the family came together to celebrate Jada's birthday. It wasn't flashy, just a dinner, laughter, presents, and for Will, that was enough. Because what he's learned, after all the fame, all the failure, all the forgiveness, is that healing isn't loud, it's steady, it's slow, it's choosing to keep going, even when no one's watching. Will Smith may never be the Fresh Prince again. He may never erase the night at the Oscars or fix every regret, but what he's built, through pain, through growth, through raw honesty, is something even more rare in Hollywood, a life that still matters, not because it's perfect, but because it's real.